Welcome to Richter's Seminars. This video presentation is from a series of free educational seminars on herb and garden topics offered each year at Richters. Today's lecture will be on what's new in herbs. The herb world is changing so much these days. You hear about it more and more on radio and television, and read about it in newspapers and magazines. And the interest seems to be increasing all the time, both on a popular level and on the scientific and medical levels. The amount of information that's coming now on the use of herbs, new discoveries about herbs, is such that it's almost impossible to keep up, even for someone like myself who is professionally involved in this industry. So I don't profess to give you an exhaustive overview of what's new in herbs here. So what I'm going to do is just sort of pick out a few things that have caught my eye in the last few years, last year, and to some extent talk about some of the new herbs that we have this year at Richters, and talk also about the changing political climate concerning herbs. Some of you may have heard about government interest in the regulation of herbs. I want to touch on that a little bit too, so that you're all up to date on what is going on. Well, let me begin by just making one comment, and that is that, you know, there are probably, in one way you could say that there are over 100,000 different kinds of herbs, because there are at least that many or more higher plants in nature, and virtually every plant has some unique quality about it, and ultimately I believe each of them will be found to have some unique medicinal or culinary or aromatic or industrial purpose. How many of you would have expected that something as noxious as poison ivy is in fact a highly valued medicinal herb? How many of you have had poison ivy? You know how nasty it is. Well, poison ivy is actually a cash crop in North America. It is collected and shipped to Europe, where they make homeopathic remedies. So that, I mention that simply to illustrate that even the most noxious of plants that you can imagine, poison ivy, is indeed an important medicinal herb. Just to finish that point, I mean, in the case of poison ivy used in homeopathy, it is used, as you might have guessed, for rashes, as an antidote to rashes in homeopathic formulation. So it is true of virtually every other higher plant around, even plants that have been recently demonized in the West, such as purple loosestrife, are now known to be medicinally active and may turn out to be very important in the future. In the case of purple loosestrife, it is known to have a very potent effect on blood sugar levels and on the liver. It can actually induce regeneration of liver in some people. So plants that we look down on are turning out to be valuable. How many of you would have expected that dandelion is a cash crop in Ontario? There is one grower I know that has 25 acres of dandelion and is making money on it, selling it. It is an important medicinal herb. So with that in mind, you know, you can look, this is the attitude we have here at Richters, is that there really isn't any plant that we would ever demonize, and we would always have respect for every plant that is on the earth and at our disposal. So we have over the years have introduced a lot of new herbs. We're up, I think, at around 800 herbs now in our catalog. So 800 out of 100,000 means that we've got a long way yet to go. And anyway, what I'd like to do now is just go over briefly some of the political stuff now, because I know some of you are interested in this. You've probably heard last year there have been some campaigns to lobby the government to modify its stance on medicinal herbal products. And in fact, there was an attempt to mobilize industry and consumers right across the country last year. And as I understand it, thousands upon thousands of letters were sent to the government. And just prior to the election, the government announced a moratorium on its policies, the policies that it intended to introduce. And now what's happened is that the government has hearings underway in Ottawa to hear from all members, consumers, herbalists, and industry members on the status of herbs and what should be done. I encourage you to try to keep up on that because there are a lot of very competing interests at these hearings, and if we're not careful, some herbs simply won't be available. At the moment, there are some herbal products you cannot buy in Canada because of policies in Ottawa. And if we're not careful, more of those products and herbs will not be available. If any of you are interested in pursuing it a little further afterwards, I'd be happy to give you some information, what groups you can join, and where you can find out more information, what's going on in Ottawa. There's no doubt that the business of herbs has grown dramatically. It is now becoming a very lucrative industry for many, many people. People that would never even think of herbs seriously in the past are now getting involved. The pharmaceutical companies, you've seen all the herbs in the drugstores in the last few years. Even doctors and healthcare providers are now seriously looking at herbs. And why is that? Why is the interest and demand in herbs growing as much as it has been growing? And I don't want to spend a lot of time trying to answer that because I think some of you already have your own ideas of why that's happening, but there's no question that herbs offer, when used appropriately, offer medicinal benefits that are still not available from traditional drugs and allopathic drugs. And many people have experienced excellent results, better than, generally with less side effects than some of the strong drugs. A perfect example of that is St. Johns Wort. This is the plant here. It's at this stage, at this time of year, St. Johns Wort is a fairly low plant, as you can see here. Later on in the summer, it will get up about this high with yellow flowers. And we have a picture of them in the catalog. So it's actually quite an attractive plant, but it does grow wild all through this area here. St. Johns Wort was in the news this year. It was featured on a program, an American program, ABC 2020, in which they argued that St. Johns Wort is an effective substitute, it may even be a superior substitute to Prozac. Now, Prozac, as many of you know, is one of the most used drugs in North America. Perhaps some people say it's abused. It's thought to be an antidepressant, helpful in increasing the attention span, but it has some nasty side effects. And St. Johns Wort was found in clinical studies to be at least as effective and perhaps even more effective than Prozac. And of course, the drug companies are not too pleased to hear about that, but nonetheless, it did get on this program, and that program sparked just a fantastic demand in St. Johns Wort. For a while, you couldn't get anything. You couldn't get seeds, you couldn't get plants, you couldn't get the dried herb, what have you. And what is it about St. Johns Wort? Well, it does have antidepressant properties. It has a constituent called hypericin, It's not clear whether this constituent is solely responsible for its medicinal effect, and in fact I wouldn't be surprised if there are a whole bunch of different constituents in the plant that contribute to the medicinal effect. This same constituent is also known to be antiviral, and it has been touted as a possible antiviral medicine even in the cases of AIDS. That hasn't been substantiated by any medical or clinical studies at this point, but there's no doubt that it's a very interesting and powerful plant. It traditionally was planted as a means to ward off witches, essentially. And I guess the sort of way that you draw the connection is that I guess because it counters depression and counters even fear and insomnia. I hadn't mentioned that also. It's a very good agent against insomnia. Because of those effects, I guess the connection back in the Middle Ages was that this was a good plant to have around to ward off witches and bad spells. So sometimes, you know, when you're looking at folklore, you can learn a lot of interesting things. We have kind of quaint descriptions of the folkloric uses of some of these plants, but often there is a rational basis behind it if you're willing to dig a little bit further. So St. Johns Wort is an example of how, you know, with scientific research and clinical research, we're learning a lot more about it, and we're getting more confident about its use, and more confident in accepting some of the folkloric understandings and historical uses of the plant. This is just an example. In fact, there are hundreds of other herbs that are under investigation currently for medicinal properties. Very often the research being prompted by what some scientists read in some herbal somewhere, or you know, learned from some herbalist even. And this research is now coming to light, and we're learning, and it's sparking a tremendous interest at all levels. Just last year, there were a number of articles in the paper about the antioxidant properties of herbs. This is something that seems to be becoming more and more better understood now. Herbs as common as thyme and sage and rosemary, these are members of the mint family, are known to have constituents in there that have direct antioxidant value. Now, what are other antioxidants that you might be familiar with? Well, vitamin C is definitely one. And what do antioxidants do? Well, they are thought to reduce the degradation of cells. In other words, the aging of cells. It slows the process of aging and reduces the probability or likelihood of diseases such as cancer developing. And so these, rosemary in particular has been identified as being a very potent antioxidant. And that leads one to come to the appreciation that the regular use of herbs, in a traditional sense, you know, rosemary, thyme, and sage in our cooking, have additional value besides just the flavoring value, that they have a direct health value. It's not clear yet whether just the ordinary use of thyme and rosemary and sage in cooking and at the ordinary rates that are recommended in recipes would be enough to give the antioxidant value at this point, but at this, nevertheless, this kind of finding gives us more encouragement to use herbs. In fact, it's been one of my sort of hobby horses, personal hobby horses, that a lot of traditional flavor combinations, food, herb combinations, or food, spice combinations, actually have their origins in a utilitarian, for utilitarian reasons. For instance, there are herbs and spices that promote digestion. And you find these same herbs often traditionally combined with foods that are difficult to digest. A good example is savory. Savory definitely promotes digestion, and it's often, well, in German it's called Bohnenkraut, which means the bean herb. So it's often tied or used with beans to give flavor now, but in the past probably because it had promoted the digestion. How did it do that? By promoting the flow of bile and the digestive juices in the system. Another example is thyme with meat and steak. Thyme is a potent, not only, as I mentioned, antioxidant, it's also a potent antibiotic or antiseptic. It will kill bacteria. And you can imagine that in the times before refrigeration, one way to preserve meat would be to take some thyme and rub it right into the meat. And you could keep the meat several days longer than otherwise if you did that. And of course now the meat-thyme combination is a classic in cooking. And I could go on. There are many other similar examples. And this, when you start thinking about these kinds of things, it gets to be very interesting and gives you a little bit more pause to think about the value of folkloric knowledge. Well, I'm going to turn now to talk about some of the herbs that we've introduced this year. At this time of year is unfortunate in a way because it's not possible to present plants to show you of everything because of the seasonality. Some plants just aren't ready at this time of year. They don't tolerate the cooler temperatures or the lower light inside the greenhouses during the winter months. But I will discuss a few of the herbs that I think are particularly interesting. Again, focusing on medicinal herbs now, just to allay your concerns for those of you who have them, I will be talking about some culinary herbs too, so it's not just going to be about medicinal herbs here. But medicinal herbs are just so fascinating, the more you learn about them, the more you just want to learn more about them. So I want to talk about a couple of interesting ones that we've introduced this year. This one here is actually a herb that you're probably already are familiar with indirectly. And probably some of you may well have used this already. This is called Psyllium, and it's a native of India and Iran and Pakistan. It's cultivated there in a large extent. It's a low herb. You can see it's already in flower at this point. It's, the seeds have 20 to 30% mucilage. And I've actually taken some seeds here and added some water, and it's already formed a gel. Okay? So you can come up later and you'll see that it's just covered in a mass of gel, natural gel. Well, this is the herb that is used in Metamucil. So how many of you are familiar with Metamucil? I'm sure many of you are. For treatment of constipation. Also irritable bowel disease, also diarrhea, and complications in pregnancy, a number of other things. It has very few contraindications, that is, instances where you shouldn't use it. Some people who are suffering from narrowing of the gastrointestinal tract should not be using this, because then you can end up with blockages, serious blockages. But otherwise, it is one of the safest herbs to use for the treatment of constipation, diarrhea. Seems kind of like the polar opposite. You're kind of counterintuitive. You would say on one hand you would treat constipation, and on the other hand you treat diarrhea as well with the same herb. But what it does is that it's a regulator. It helps to regulate, bring back to normal processes. And it does that by absorbing water and expanding in this fashion. So this plant here is one of the most important medicinal herbs in North America because Metamucil and other related products are so widely used now. So this one here now is available in a form, in seed form, and can be grown outside. This is actually in the same genus as the plantain. Plantain. How many of you are familiar with the weed plantain? The wide leaves. Well, this is also a plantago, but as you can see, it has almost grass-like leaves. But the flowers, if you look closely, are almost identical to the plantain weed. Now, the plantain, the common weed in lawns, many of you have been spending hours out there digging out of your lawn, is also medicinal. You can take the leaves of that and rub it fresh, the fresh juice of that, against insect bites and stings and cuts and bruises and so on, and it helps to heal and has a bit of an antiseptic property to it. So that's Psyllium. Another one I want to talk about, which is a lot less known and very interesting plant. It has a lot of features about it, some very negative and some very positive. It's called Tribulus. It's in our catalog. It's also known as puncture vine and caltrop. It's a native of India and China, where it's been used for 5,000 years. Now, I've got some seeds up here. You're welcome to come up afterwards and have a look at it, but what you'll find is that it has these nasty little spines on the seeds. And what they do is they cling to people. And this plant here is pretty much cosmopolitan. It's everywhere in the world in the warmer areas, not in Ontario, but it wouldn't survive here, but it's over winter, that is. But it clings, and it has through this clinging burrs spread around the world. But these same burrs, the same seeds here, fruits, have some very interesting properties. Back in, I think, the 70s and 80s, the Bulgarians and the East Germans took a great interest in this plant, following up on folkloric knowledge from India that the plant had some sort of effect on the hormonal system of both males and females. These East Germans and Bulgarian scientists did some work on it and learned that the plant has some compounds in it that affect a signal, a hormonal signal in the body, which is called the luteinizing hormone. That luteinizing hormone is the signal to the body to produce hormones such as testosterone. So this luteinizing hormone stimulates the production, natural production of testosterone and other hormones in the body, and so it has been found in folklore and also in these clinical studies that it could boost muscle development in men, reduce a certain amount of signs of aging, certainly improve fertility in women. It can even, and other seemingly unrelated effects, such as strong effects on the whole urinary system, the whole tract, even itchy skin, it seems to have a powerful effect on it, and arthritis. So it's a terrible annual weed, as I mentioned, but anyway, it's a low-growing plant, and it would be grown as an annual. It's in the same family as Chaparral, which is an anti-cancer herb, and it is now being marketed. You can especially see this on the internet. I have examples here for those who are interested. It's being marketed in formulations for bodybuilding formulas and clinical studies are suggesting that it works. Now, one of the things about it, now we all know about all this nonsense about, not nonsense, I shouldn't say that, it's all this stuff about how steroids are very bad for the body. That is very true. And the use of artificial steroids has this effect, actually, that it depresses this luteinizing hormone and actually, in the end, causes a reduction in the production of testosterone. So it has, when you use the hormones, as athletes would use, that can have some very serious effects on the normal pathways for steroids in the body. Where the difference here is that this doesn't have that effect at all. It has the opposite effect. It actually stimulates that and allows the body's own machinery to create the same steroidal type hormones, natural hormones, rather than the artificial forms. And as a result, the side effects are much less serious. So although we all have this kind of mental idea that, anything to do with steroids is bad, in fact, it's essential to the normal functioning of a body to have these steroids produced in the body, and it's essential to have the pathways going from one hormone to the other developing. So this may turn out to, you may find in the course of the next few years a sort of a new approach or new views at looking at this whole issue of steroids. Our body requires steroids. Many of the important medicinal drugs are steroidal in nature. Many of the herbs that we sell in our catalog are used as precursors for the manufacture of artificial steroids. And I think this kind of negative sort of connotation about steroids is going to change over the next few years. People will start to understand that they're very essential. Clearly, they have been badly abused and with great detriment to athletes. But on the other hand, they're very important to our normal health. So this plant here, I think, is going to attract some more attention in the future. Well, let me turn my attention to a plant that is among the most notorious of our plants on planet. But also, and I think many of you will be surprised to know that you probably, each and every one of you has consumed this plant. You didn't even know it. And that is the opium poppy. Opium poppy. I've got here this young seedlings. It's an annual. This is from our seed tests. And normally you would sow this in the garden outside where they're to grow, and they will bloom the same season. Here we're just doing our usual germ test, seed germ test. You can see the germination is excellent on this plant. But the opium poppy, yes, it is the source of all those alkaloids and notoriously heroin and codeine and so on. But this plant is the source of the bread seed, poppy seed, which is used on bagels and breads and so on. So any of you consume those, pastries will have consumed opium poppy. So does that make you an addict? I don't know. But this is, again, a very interesting twist on a plant that has been very much demonized in Western culture, where it has very important properties. The government doesn't know what to do with this situation. It knows very well that millions upon millions of dollars of poppy seeds are imported into this country. It's essential for the baking industry. But at the same time, it's well aware that it's exactly the same species that is used for opium production. And when you look at the laws concerning it, you can see that they realize that this is the situation, because they cannot ban the seeds, and they cannot ban the planting of those seeds. But what is against the law is, of course, the extraction of the opium and the various constituents of opium, latex. So if you plant the plant, it's, by the way, a very beautiful plant. It's one of the most interesting and beautiful annual flowers. Now just be careful that you don't start going out there and trying to harvest the latex. Anyway, it's been marketed in North America by seed companies for many years. We didn't introduce it until this year because we were a little confused about the legal status of the plant. But now I think it's pretty clear. And in the United States, for instance, companies have been selling it for at least 10 years now. And the government realizes that it is an important horticultural plant. In Europe, for instance, there's a real breeding effort to produce horticultural strains of opium poppy with all different colors of flowers. It's a very attractive plant. So, anyway, that's the opium poppy. I want to mention this plant here, which is a very interesting plant. This is called Licorice Flag. A flag. Flag is Licorice, in the genus Licorice. And Licorice, the Licorice root, or calamus root, is used principally as a fixative for potpourris, meaning you take the powdered root and you put it in with a mixture of herbs such as leaves and rose flowers, etc., to preserve the fragrance of that. So for potpourri fixatives. And however, this particular strain was found in Thailand, where it is used in cooking. And I don't know yet the details of how it is used in Thai cooking, but it has this magnificent flavor, the fragrance on it. And if you're all welcome to come up afterward and smell it. Take a little piece of a leaf and rub it. It's a hardy plant. It could be very attractively grown as a clump. This would form a very dense clump in the garden. Doesn't have a flower, but anytime you want to get a real kick out of smelling it, you just take a little piece and smell it. It's intensely licorice scented. Really an amazing plant. And I hope that I will have the opportunity to learn more about how it is used in Thai cooking. I'm not quite sure. Whether it's the leaves or the roots, I'm not quite sure yet. So that's a very interesting aromatic plant and a culinary plant. Here's a plant that we're introducing this year. This one here is probably one of the most important medicinal herbs in North America now because of the popularity of the Essiac herbal remedy for cancer. How many of you are familiar with Essiac? Yeah. About a third of you. Okay, Essiac, for the rest of you, is a remedy that was developed and promoted by a nurse from Bracebridge, starting back as early as the 30s. And she used this remedy. It was a mixture of 4 herbs, including this plant here called slippery elm. These 4 herbs were used in a certain formulation and was found to be effective against certain types of cancers. There's been some studies, not a lot to verify that, but there have been some studies, and an awful lot of people, a lot of testimonials seem to support the effectiveness of this plant and this remedy, and it's become extremely important in the herb industry. The 4 herbs that are used in this are very much in demand, and it had been, up until this year, impossible to get plants or seeds of the slippery elm. You could get the other 3, but you couldn't get this one. One of the other ones is this one here, Japanese burdock. Actually, burdock, I should say. Burdock is an interesting plant. As you well know, it's a weed, it's a burr, it's another burr plant. It can be a pain when you get them stuck in your, especially your cat's furs and the dog's furs and so on. But this plant here has tremendous medicinal properties. Now, this has been in our catalog for a number of years, but we're this year offering it in plant form. And the reason why we've decided to add plants to our catalog is because the interest in it has grown dramatically in the last few years. And it has also, like dandelion, become a commercial crop in North America. Well, burdock is interesting because, as I mentioned, it's one of the 4 herbs in the SCX formula. And Japanese research has found that it has potent anti-tumor properties. Quite a few studies were done where it actually will reduce tumors and help prevent cancers and development of tumors. The Japanese traditionally grow a version that is used as a vegetable. The long roots, it produces roots about as yay long, are a delicacy in Japan. The medicinal use of it was also noted in Japanese herbal medicine, but here in North America, the problem was for the commercial industry was that it was almost impossible to get good quantities of the wild burdock seed here, that grows in this area. So instead of growing the type of burdock that is typical of this area for the SCX formula, commercial growers bought the seed from Japan and started to grow that because this variety produces more seed and is easier to grow than the wild burdock here. And especially since the research in Japan backs up the medicinal claims, such the anti-tumor effects, the industry has gone, has put its faith in this particular strain. So this is a very interesting plant, both culinary and medicinal. Okay, another, let's see, what else am I going to discuss? Here's a plant, the seeds are used. It's called Tefrozia. We have this is again a seed test here, so we've got some little seedlings coming up here. This plant here is a very potent source of rotenone. Rotenone is an insecticide, but it's also a fish poison. And it was used in Africa as a fish poison where they would grind this up and put it in the river and the fish would die, but it would not be toxic to humans. So it was a very easy way to get your meal. So this plant here is of interest because of its insecticidal properties. As many of you know, the interest in organic herbal organic plant production, vegetable production, and herb production has increased dramatically over the last 10 or 15 years. And the need for alternate sources of insecticidal compounds from natural sources is getting more acute because there are not enough natural pesticides to kill all the various insects that plague plants. It's still a struggle, a big struggle, to try to keep your plants clean and free of insects with natural compounds and natural methods. So that's the reason why we added this item, because there's a possibility that this one will be usable for insecticidal properties. We've also added some plants for their ornamental value. Herbs are not just culinary or medicinal or aromatic. Many of them are very attractive in the garden setting. Oftentimes we look for variegated plants or various colorations in the leaves to give a nice horticultural effect in the garden. And with a nicely designed garden, you can very intelligently use the different textures and colors of herbs to make an attractive effect in the garden. It doesn't have to be a big weed patch in your front lawn at all. It can look that way very easily if you indiscriminately plant, tall plants in the front and little, lower plants in the back and so on. It can look pretty ugly, and I think many novices in the herb gardening end up doing that at first until they learn more about the herbs themselves. But in fact, herbs, medicinal herbs, culinary herbs, and others can have nice, attractive properties. This one here is called Bugle. The bronze bugle is a low creeping herb, ideal for semi-shaded areas or sun areas, forms dense masses of these bronze-colored leaves. Very nice ground cover. And this one here is called goutweed. Now the green goutweed is really a noxious weed, it truly is, but it is medicinal, I guarantee you. But the variegated one is not as aggressive. Because of the variegation, now you can think about this one here. This is always true, that variegated plants tend not to be as aggressive grower. And why is that? Because plants depend on photosynthesis for growth. Photosynthesis can only occur in the green parts of the plant. That's where the chlorophylls are. Remember your high school biology. So when you have a variegated plant, more often than not, in the variegated or in the white areas, you don't have any chlorophyll, you don't have any photosynthesis occurring, and therefore, if half a leaf surface area is not photosynthesizing, the plant grows half as fast. And that's true of this. It is not an invasive plant, the variegated version. The green version, yes. I see a smile over here. You're familiar with it? Yes. Yeah. So this one is not as aggressive. And goutweed, indeed, is used and has been used for the treatment of gout. It helps to stimulate the urinary tract and promote the excretion of compounds into the kidney, and the kinds of compounds that would otherwise accumulate in joints and would cause abrasions and so on and so forth. So that's a long known, go back to the time of John Gerard and before, the earliest herbalists of Britain. You'll find this is called goutweed.
Spell it.
Goutweed?
Spell it.
G-O-U-T-W-E-E-D. Goutweed. Okay. Okay, what else have we got here? These ones here are not new for this year, but worth pointing out. These are young plants at this point. They're very attractive garden plants. Feverfew, as many of you already know, is a potent remedy for migraine. It's been marketed now for the last 3 or 4 years in Ontario and Canada under various product names. Migraleaf is one, a few other names. Some of them are pharmaceutical companies are very much involved in this plant. And Feverfew comes in many different ornamental forms. And we did some studies on the medicinal content of these ones, and although it's has less parthenolide content as the standard varieties of Feverfew, these ones still have enough parthenolide to make them medicinally active. And at the same time, you find that these are very attractive in the garden. They produce nice mounds, nice for drying. If you want to do dried flower arrangements with Feverfew, these ones are ideal for that. As a double flowering form is especially suited for that. Other ornamental plants that have been introduced this year are scented geraniums, again variegated. There's this one here, which is the Peacock scented geranium, and this one here, which is the variegated nutmeg geranium. You can see the white variegations on that. So sometimes when you a little board of just the green foliage, a plant like this can help add a little bit of color. The scent, this one here, very strong nutmeg scent. It's quite surprising. Those of you who are not familiar with the scented geraniums, I encourage you to go in there, rub the leaves, smell them. It's quite surprising how many of them and how many scents there are in the scented geranium world. There's everything from lemon to lime to orange, peppermint, rose, nutmeg in this case. The Peacock Geranium is a very strong scented geranium. It's really in the rose group with a hint of lemon in it. So it's when you grow this in a pot, especially indoors, even if you're not even without rubbing it, you do, especially if it's a sunny day, a warm day, you will notice the scent coming off this plant. So it's a lovely herb to have, and it's quite easy to grow. The big news in the herb world this year is a new basil that was introduced. And unfortunately, I only have young seedlings at the moment, so you can't really get a good sense of what it looks like in its larger format. Basil, just to explain, basil does not like temperatures below 50 degrees Fahrenheit at night. If it gets that, it just does not do very well. And during the winter months, save on heat and the heating costs, we do let our temperatures go below 50 degrees. So that is the reason why our basil plants at this time of year tend to be small and spindly and not as good. But in another month and a half, we'll have lovely plants available. Seeds, of course, are available. Now this is the Sweet Danny Lemon Basil. This was developed by Jim Simon, who is a researcher at Purdue University in the United States. He has one of the biggest herb research programs in the United States, and he has been responsible for developing a lot of very interesting plants in the last few years. He's working on things like Chinese wormwood, echinacea, and quite a host of others. And his biggest interest is the basils. And this particular basil was selected for extremely high concentrations of the lemon oil. Now, all basils, just so you understand, have most of the spectrum of oils that you find in basil. Basil, by the way, is not just a single oil. It's an oil composed of a number of different compounds, oftentimes as many as 10 to 20 different essential oils make up basil oil. But in the different basil varieties, you get different proportions of those oils. So you get the lemon ones, you get the sweet regular basils, you get camphor, you get quite a range of scents. So what Jim Simon did was select out one that was extremely high in the lemon scent, and you'll find that when you grow this plant and smell it, that it is very potent. From Thailand comes a variety called lime basil. So there again, another basil, but with a slightly different or somewhat different composition in its oil to give now primarily a lime fragrance to it. And it's very nice to grow, nice fragrance, and can be used in cooking, both in fresh and dried form. Another plant that we've introduced, now this one here, more of an ornamental, is this one here, the limelight licorice plant. How many of you are familiar with licorice plant? I'm not talking about licorice, which is the root that's used for medicinal and for flavoring, but the licorice plant, which is really more of an ornamental herb. How many of you are familiar with that? One? Several? Yeah, a few of them. Pardon me? A silver licorice, right. Well, the silver licorice is actually becoming more and more commonly grown in window boxes and hanging baskets now, combined with ivy geraniums and other hanging plants, because of it has a growth habit that hangs out or descends downward from the basket, and it has a very bright, distinct silver foliage. Very easy to grow. Its main value really is medicinal. Why it got connected with herbs is still a bit of a mystery for us, although in the herb world you do find an awful lot of interest in silver herbs and in variegated herbs. So along the way people have added a few other plants that at the moment we still don't know whether there's a real medicinal use or other use for the plant. So the silver one has been used for its ornamental effect in herb gardens for many years now, especially hanging baskets. And now a new variety has come out which is called Limelight, which has a kind of a yellowish tinge to it. And although it's small now and it doesn't really show much at this point, when it gets larger it's a very attractive plant. And so it gives you yet another alternative for introducing color and interest to your garden, and to expand on the idea, on the horticultural appeal of your garden.
Perennial?
Sorry?
Is this perennial?
This is a tender perennial, just like the silver licorice. It's not a hardy perennial. Okay. What else have we added this year? Sorry, question?
Can you get it in seeds? Or is it strictly plants?
It's strictly plants. I've never seen it set seeds at this point. It rarely produces a kind of a yellow flower. When it does produce those flowers can be easily preserved as everlasting. So they'll last for years. But it's not free flowering.
Does it get large?
The silver one can, if you have a hanging basket like this, you can get branches coming down as far as like that.
I'm wondering, is that like...
This one here will get almost as big. Yeah. Okay. Okay. Any questions at this?
What about the African blue basil?
African blue basil. African blue basil is not new. We've had it around for many years. African blue basil is a favorite of my mother's, so that's why she brings that one up. So that's a plug for the plant, but
Tender perennial.
it's a tender perennial. African blue basil is, for those of you who are not familiar with the plant, it's a very interesting plant too. It was an accidental hybrid between camphor basil and regular purple basil. And ever since then it's been maintained in cut-in form. And it has both the elements of regular basil flavor, kind of a clove element to it, and it has a little bit of a camphor to it. Now off the top you would think, well, camphor, well, that's kind of, it doesn't make for much of a culinary plant flavor, but in fact it's just a hint of camphor, and it grows on you, definitely grows on you. And it's been among the most popular herbs, surprisingly. It surprised me a lot. It turned out to be one of the most popular herbs over the last 3 or 4 years. We sell thousands of this plant. It's one of those herbs that have slowly developed kind of almost a real following for without any promotion. Indeed, it couldn't have been promoted very heavily because it is not a plant that could be patented or introduced in the same manner that Sweet Danny was introduced by the Burpee Seed Company this year. So it's an interesting plant. A herb company in Ohio was the one that found it. So you can see it has the purplish variegations, and then when you smell it, it's a very interesting combination. So you're welcome to come up and try that at the end. So any other questions at this point? Question then is, how do we find out about what parts are used, and particularly how to use the herbs? So where do you find that? Well, in our catalog, I wish I could put a lot more information in the catalog. It's a real struggle to decide what does go in the catalog. We're hoping that over the next few years that we'll be adding much more information to our internet catalog, which this catalog is now on the internet, but it's right now just a carbon copy of this print catalog. But that'll give us a space to add much more information about how to grow the plants and how to use them, what parts are used, et cetera, et cetera. In the meantime, well, yes, it is often hard to find reliable medicinal information about herbs. There are some good books out there that almost always seem to only cover maybe 70 or 80% of the herbs that you might have heard about out there. And there's always, you know, the frustrating 10 or 20% of herbs that you've heard about that you can't find anything about.
You can come here.
You can always come here, that's true. But invariably it means, you know, a combination of books. I would have on my bookshelf maybe as many as half a dozen different medicinal herb books. And by that, you know, with those 6, cover, you know, maybe 99% of the herbs. It's very difficult. See, part of the problem is that so much new information is coming on. It's becoming available. On one hand, we have so many more herbs of ethnic origin, with an ethnic history that weren't available in the West, in Europe, or in North America until even just this decade. So that kind of information wouldn't be included in a book that's 10 years old. The other reason, of course, is the fantastic amount of medicinal, scientific, and clinical information that's now becoming available. So that's not going to be found in books. Like much of the information, recent information on Johns Wort cannot be found, even in a book that specializes on just Johns Wort. So it is a challenge to get reliable information. Now, there are some books that we have a lot of confidence in. One of the books that I particularly like as a reference book, not necessarily as a how to use, but certainly as a starting point reference book is Denny Bowen's Encyclopedia of Herbs and Their Uses. It's a large format book, sorry? Denny Bowen, B-O-W-N is her last name. It's in our catalog. It's called the Encyclopedia of Herbs and Their Uses. Now it covers the whole gamut, the medicinals, the culinary, the aromatics, and it does a very nice job on the cultivation of those plants as well. It will tell you the hardiness zones, tell you the heights, the spacing, light conditions that are required, et cetera, et cetera. So as a single source, that is certainly a starting point. And our staff regularly resorts to that book when answering questions. But even that is lacking in herbs that the author just wasn't aware of at the time when the book was written. So as new books come out, more information is coming out. But a lot of the herbs that are now becoming available from places like India, South America, China in particular, you have to struggle to find anything at all. And yet these are herbs that have a 5,000-year history in those cultures. There's a lot of interest in them, and people want to grow them and learn more about them. But some of that knowledge is going to come from just trial and error here in the West as we learn more about them. Well, anyway, thank you very much for coming. I hope that I've been able to give you some information and some inspiration to try some herbs in your garden this year or inside. I hope you feel a little bit more confident about using herbs. I don't know how many times people come here to buy herbs, plant them in the garden, then come back and ask us, well, I have all these herbs, but I don't know how to use them. And they're always a little afraid to use the herb. Well, don't be afraid to use. Be adventurous. Try them, especially in the culinary herb. Use them in, pardon me? And the culinary herbs are not poisonous. And be adventurous. Use them in non-traditional ways. Just to give you an example, one experiment I just tried, just for the heck of it, I tried a beet salad. I put fresh French tarragon in a beet salad, and that was just divine.
In what?
In a beet salad. Red beet salad.
Oh, beet salad.
Yeah.
I understood pizza.
But that combination is so counterintuitive, but it is wonderful. It's absolutely wonderful. Everyone that tried it loves it. So there you go. Be adventurous.
But if you try a new herb, don't put it in a whole soup or something. Put it in a little bit. Maybe your husband doesn't like it. Get them used to it slowly.
Okay, well, thank you very much for coming.
At Richters, it's not just a garden, it's a whole new world. For herb plants, seeds, veggies, and more, visit us at richters.com or call 1-800-668-4372.